Here we go. A little Locked On 49ers live. Got to turn the mic on, which I forget to do about half the time I start these podcasts. We're talking wide receivers on today's Locked On 49ers. Deebo Samuel and Brandon Aiyuk. How good could that duo be in 2023? The best version of both of them. Danny Gray's year 2 is a big year for him in his career. Juwan Jennings, the entire crew of wide receivers. Did the 49ers get better at wide receiver in 2023? Coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker with you as always at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you hit us up at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker on Twitter. Find us on YouTube as well. Drop a comment and make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your 49ers and every other NFL podcast. By the way, Peacock and Williamson you can find right here on the Locked On Podcast Network as well. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Wide receivers. And luckily, Croc, I do a podcast every day here with a wide receiver guru. You were first a DB guru, being a defensive back yourself, but you covered so many wide receivers that you know what you're breaking down on that side of the football as well. So I think it's a fun conversation to get into. We got some over-unders on receiving yards and whether we like that action for the San Francisco 49ers wide receivers in 2023. But the big overriding question, because we didn't hit wide receivers on the rest of our offense show, asking if the 49ers got better position by position. The defensive side of the ball is going to be coming up in an episode very soon here on Locked On 49ers. Did the 49ers get better at wide receiver in this offseason, Croc?
I think they got better. And this is why. It's pretty much the same cast right now. You know, you'll see how if Bell has an opportunity, Ronnie Bell, rookie receiver out of Michigan, can he make noise and kind of maybe see a guy like Danny Gray for some tick, or even a Ray McLeod as a returner and a guy who potentially gets out there on the field. But ultimately, the reason why I think they got better is because I think Deebo Samuel will be better. I think Brandon Aiyuk, what he did last year, it'll be something similar to that. And I think, you know, every year he's the guy who's unguardable in the offseason, priming to have a breakout year. And then the offense just doesn't allow him to really maximize the production I think that he is capable of doing. But Deebo Samuel, and the way that he wins, if he's on, and he's kind of had this on and off thing each year, rookie year, played very well. Next year, hurt, missed a lot of time, wasn't productive. 2019 was, or not 19, excuse me, that was his rookie year. The next year was the All-Pro year, where he went crazy, had almost 1,800 total yards. He had 14 touchdowns. And then last year, kind of a drop off. And he talked about some of the offseason distractions and things like that. So I think this year he's on, and I think that makes the offensive weaponry at the receiver position just much more dangerous.
Yeah, just by doing nothing at the wide receiver position, and I say nothing, they drafted a 6th-round guy. They brought in some undrafted free agents, but they brought in Chris Conley as well, brought back Willie Snead. So, you know, they did some things, but this is the 49ers telling us, no, we like the guys we have, and they should like the guys they have. But when you look at Brandon Aiyuk and his own projection of himself getting better, ready to take off, this year, and he's gotten better every single year. Deebo Samuel admitting that he was awful last year and maybe even being a little too hard on himself, out of shape and awful. He wasn't awful, but he wasn't the same guy we saw in 2021. So Deebo Samuel being the best version of himself now, with Brandon Aiyuk taking another step, and then Juwan Jennings just continuing to be the guy that he is. You don't have to lean heavily on his skill set, but he can come in, get open on third down, and make a catch for you, and he can block for the running game. So the 49ers are very happy what they have there in those three guys. And then Ray McLeod is another slot receiver. He's your kick returner, your punt returner. They know what they have there in Ray McLeod. As long as there's no big injuries with those four, they feel good about it, and maybe even getting a tick better year over year here with those four players. Danny Gray's a big one though, Croc, because he's coming into year two, and that's usually when you see a big jump for wide receivers. Year two and year three are the big years for wide receivers in the NFL. And we've talked a lot about Danny Gray from before he was drafted to after he was drafted to breaking down some of his rookie tape. And there's not a lot of it from the 49ers last year. And I think that's the player with the most to be gained from last year to this year. And now he's only wide receiver 5 right now, but could he start to work in and be wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3 in this offense? If there's any injuries in front of him, can he come in and play some really big snaps for the 49ers? Or is he still going to be that guy that comes in and, sees a handful of snaps in a game, maybe gets a target if he's lucky?
Yeah, I think the big thing is obviously doing what Kyle Shanahan is asking him to do. Kyle Shanahan very hard on the receiver position. I think it was Deebo Samuel that said, man, because Kyle played the receiver position in college at Texas. I know a lot of people kind of forget about that, but he's the hardest on that group. He demands the most out of them. And when you see the effort, especially from guys like what we've seen from Brandon Aiyuk, blocking down the field. I remember Richie James in there blocking, right? Like those guys throw their bodies around. He has to do something specific, and if you do it, you'll be on the field. So Danny Gray, for him, especially with the skill set and adding that speed element, it's all about truly understanding what Kyle wants and then being able to execute that. And after a rookie season of it, which Deebo Samuel, he talked about really not getting it until dang near towards the end of the year, where he started to kind of really truly understand the offense. Brandon Aiyuk, Kyle Shanahan came out and said he wouldn't have played as a rookie if not for the injuries to the receiver position. And now you're seeing Danny Gray, who's also kind of having this slower start at the group. So having an offseason where you understand what Kyle wants, that should help you a lot more get acclimated to the offense and carve out whatever your role is going to be.
Mike in the chat says, Deebo feeling the heat of Brandon Aiyuk nipping at his bag. I think he likes the heat, though, motivation. Part of me thinks that I don't think that's much of a motivating factor for athletes at this level. And maybe it is, but maybe if it is, it's kind of it's not the best sign if that's what he needs, right, Croc? Because you want them to be self-motivated. We're trying to be the best that guy they can be no matter what's happening there. And, and it's human nature. Sometimes you do, look at things differently because of whatever's here, whatever there. Brandon Aiyuk, we've seen him go into the doghouse and he came out of it a better wide receiver. And maybe Deebo Samuel needed that. Maybe he needed a pep talk from his coach and watching the tape with him. Maybe he already knew it and he just felt that he wasn't his best self last year. And self-motivation is the biggest factor to being a great NFL player. And it's no different for any of these guys, no matter what position you play. But, I'm sure he wants to be the top dog, right? Nobody wants to be, because as soon as you're the second fiddle at wide receiver, now you become third, fourth fiddle in the offense too. So you need to fight for targets on this offense during training camp, during the spring season, because you need them drawing up plays for you. You need them to be because that's the way Kyle Shanahan does things. He plans for you to be open. He gets you open in space so you can make plays after the catch, right? So you want to be on his list for sure.
I think we see a lot of these NFL players and guys have so much talent, so much ability, but why are some guys better at just maximizing that ability year in and year out? And I think for Deebo Samuel, he has to find that reason as to why he's going to prepare for a season at a certain level and, be around for certain things and put in that extra kind of work. Because he does stuff, but I think he does things to kind of like, hey man, I'm this terrific athlete. I have all this crazy ability right after catch. I'm one of the best in the league, regardless of what I do. So I'm going to lean on that as opposed to working on some things that might be a strength, improving the strengths, and then some things that might be a weakness and improving the weakness. I think that's something that would really help him kind of take his game to the next level. But I don't know if everybody wants to put that type of work in though.
It's a grind, man. You got to really want it to be at the upper level of any kind of pro athlete, no matter what sport it is. You got to want it. You got to love it. And if people have to talk you into working hard, it's probably not going to be a long career for you.
And some people, they don't have to put in all the work in it. It's not going to matter. They would be great regardless. Yeah. People like me, I could put in all the work and it wasn't going to matter. I was going to flame out regardless. So, it just depends on the person, but I think everybody would agree Deebo Samuel is a special talent.
Yes, no doubt. I expect a huge year for Deebo Samuel. What exactly are we talking with numbers, though, when it comes to Deebo Samuel? Brandon Aiyuk, what are some of the over-unders for maybe McCaffrey and Kittle, too, for 49ers pass catchers, receiving yards? What could this look like? And I want to talk a little bit more about what exactly Danny Gray can do to be better in his career going into year 2 as a wide receiver in the 49ers offense. Next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Baseball season in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on all the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Don't miss your chance to snag that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. You can bet on those on the baseball games. You can bet on the San Francisco Giants too. Go to LA and sweep the Dodgers in Dodger Stadium. You can find tons of NFL props for the following season, like some of the wide receiver numbers we're going to talk about here, some of the win totals for every team in the NFL, for rookies of the year, Super Bowl champions, sacks, all of it you can find right now at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right.
Speaking of Major League Baseball, go Giants. They're on the heater right now.
Oh, yeah,
they're going crazy. Just swept the Dodgers. Let's go.
You love to see it. You absolutely love to see it. Prime in the chat says, peace and respect. Prime Sports Media. I don't know if that's actual Prime or not, but Prime, if you're in the chat. Croc drafted in our all-time San Francisco 49ers team. Even though there's only 1 year, it was a high-level year.
1 year, but it was literally Deion Sanders' best year of his career. A guy who had such an illustrious career. I mean,
it was the best.
Six picks, 3 ran back for touchdowns, defensive player of the year. I mean, come on. What I don't understand how. I get it. It was 1 year, but it was like one amazing year. Like that's got to be up there with.
It was probably the best year of cornerback play in the history of the NFL.
Yeah. And he did it as a 49er.
Yep, absolutely. Speaking of guys that could go play other sports, remember we had the debate about, NFL players playing in the NBA, NBA players playing in the NFL. About Deion. I would say Randy Moss in our lifetime. Randy Moss, Deion. I mean, Deion played Major League Baseball. You don't think he could mess around, play a little NBA basketball too? I would say Randy Moss, Deion, probably the top 2 guys of NFL players in our lifetime that could go play in the NBA.
If I'm not mistaken, Terrell Owens played basketball at Chattanooga. So
he's Terrell Owens post career was a little bit like seeing DK Metcalf in the in this celebrity all-star game. Like he's dunking, but he's just so thick and big and rocked up. Like it's a completely different body that you have to build for the NFL versus what you're building to go play basketball.
Yeah, but as far as Deion, man, how underrated of an MLB career did he have? Because I know he didn't play like every game of every season, but dude was in the major leagues for 8-9 years. Like that's incredible. Yep. Like it's not like, hey, I just, he had to try out, or some of these guys do the little farm league thing. I think I've seen Russell Wilson in spring ball with the Yankees, things like that. Like, no, like he was in the majors for 8-9 years. And if they would have won the World Series, they were talking about him being the World Series MVP.
He was amazing. Obviously, he was so athletic and that left-handed swing, and he got to first base so fast. And some surprising power too. He was a leadoff hitter. He had that NFL strength, and so he could put the ball out of the ballpark too on you. If you try to go inside, he'd turn on that thing. Khalil Young says, this is an important one. It says, Peacock, Crocky, happy belated Father's Day to you both. Appreciate that. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, all the sons out there, all the sons that might not have fathers anymore. It was a really cool weekend I was back in my hometown, Visalia, California, hanging with the family. Croc was back in California as well. So we had a good old time. Croc and I weren't hanging out, but we were in separate vibes, separate towns in the Valley of California. And happy Juneteenth as well to everyone out there on this Monday. Yeah. All right, getting back to our conversation. We had a question. Let's talk a little bit more before we get to the over-unders on receiving yards and what it actually could look like at wide receiver for the 49ers statistically. Let's talk a little bit more about Danny Gray here, Croc. And we had a few questions in the chat. Like, what exactly do we need to see from Danny Gray? Because the speed is evident. We saw the speed in college, but the speed still wasn't playable in the NFL. Not that it wasn't playable because he wasn't still fast. He was still fast, but he wasn't even taking advantage of what his speed could do to kill somebody. And you think, okay, this guy's fast. He runs a 4.3. You could at least bring him in and he could run a a deep over. He could run a post. But we saw him run post routes. And it was like, man, you're getting yourself covered by the way you're running this post route. This is the route you're supposed to be able to run with this 4.3 speed that you should be able to get open and run away from guys. But he's cutting off he's giving the DB basically an angle to keep him covered as he runs that route.
I think part of playing receiver is truly understanding the understanding leverage, how to attack defensive backs certain ways to get them to do certain things. And when you're either really fast or maybe really big, sometimes you kind of skip over that step in your development. And it's like, hey, man, I'm in college. Or high school, I can just run by everybody. College, I can just run by everybody. NFL, you ain't running past everybody. So you got to figure out different ways to truly be able to win consistently. I mean, look at a guy like DK Metcalf. He was a 4.3 guy, but he was still going to win at all levels. Now, he had to learn how to win, how he was going to win, and it probably wasn't going to be with a ton of separation. But if it's with body positioning, understanding how to sell certain things, and then just being more aggressive than other guys, then winning at the catch point, he was going to do all those things as well as be able to outrun everybody, which we've seen him do several times against the 49ers. Well, Danny Gray is still figuring out, like, all right, how am I going to win at the NFL level? Because it's typically not just going to be speed. And even with guys like Tyreek Hill, his start and stop is crazy. His ability to change direction on a dime is crazy. And I think all those elements with Danny Gray, who looks like more of a long strider, he has to understand how to use more high-end controlled speed, use the threat of his speed to free him up on underneath routes. And the more he can do those type of things, as well as do it while running Kyle Shanahan's offense the way that he wants it, that's when you'll start seeing a better version of him on the field.
We were just called the Willis and Bowman of podcasters, Croc, from David in the chat. I like that one a lot. On that point, Croc, about wide receivers and in Kyle Shanahan's offense, Steve says, why is Kyle's offense so difficult for a wide receiver?
So when you get to the NFL, and again, I don't know why it's so difficult with the 49ers, but just in general, and then what I got to experience being with the Jets and seeing some of my buddies, shout out to my guy Joe Collins out there from Seaside, California, and we would train together out in Sacramento, and he went to Weber State. But Joe, he walked around with these flashcards, and the flashcards, they have all these different like sight adjustments that you have to know, and you have to be on the same page with the quarterback and see the same thing that he's seeing. And there are certain routes where you see a route, but then off of that route, there's like 3 or 4 different options on how you're supposed to run a route and get to a certain area based on the coverage you're getting, the alignment you're getting, where's that safety, right? There's all kind of different things. And that thinking process for a lot of guys is really difficult transitioning to the NFL. So it's not just like, hey, man, you got a slant route, just go out there and run a slant. And obviously, like that will be the case at times. But at the NFL level, especially with Kyle Shanahan, understanding the exact depth that he wants you to be at, when he wants you to be at that depth, 1 yard outside the hash, you need to break your route off here because it coincides with a route maybe on the other side and how they work in unison, as opposed to a lot of what you get in college, a lot of spread, air raid. Hey, it's kind of like these, you run this, you run that, you run this, and you just kind of run your route, not really worrying about other people. And I think the NFL, it's a big adjustment for a lot of guys. So typically you see receivers kind of be somewhat not late bloomers, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time. It was rare that you see guys just hit the ground running until, like, I'd say probably that Odell Beckham class. They all came in getting 1,000 yards and they just took off and went crazy. And I think now guys are expected to come in and be Jamar Chase, be Justin Jefferson, be some of these guys that are having 1,000-yard seasons right away.
I think wide receivers are coming into the league more prepared. Quarterbacks are as well. Just how much football they're playing, all the 7-on-7s, how much footwork and running of routes and all of these things. They learn terminology, probably not Kyle Shanahan necessarily NFL terminology, but they learn a lot of terminology. They learn a lot younger than they used to. It used to be with quarterbacks and wide receivers. You kind of didn't even play for 2 years when you came into the league, and it's very different now. You expect guys to play a lot earlier, and so they're playing a lot more. But I think the one thing that you aren't ready for when you jump from college, and especially in a spread system to Kyle Shanahan's offense, is what you just mentioned there, Croc, and just the level of detail. Like, was it Emmanuel Sanders? Who was the wide receiver, a former Shanahan wide receiver, that was talking about those details of like running the route, not on the hash, Not a yard inside the hash, exactly 1 yard outside the hash is where the mark is that you have to hit here. I saw Chris Forrester do some breakdowns of the 49ers offensive line last year, and he during some film work, and he was talking about landmarks and hitting the landmark. It's like you have to be on this shoulder of this player over here. You can't just be on the guy. You got to be right here. And your landmark for the running back is this hole over here. And you can't break that until this happens. And then this happens. And it's just so detailed. And Kyle Shanahan's offense is so detailed in all of those ways. And then on top of that, you got to be physical and you got to be out there blocking. And so there's a lot of things you're asked to do in Kyle Shanahan's offense that maybe you're not asked to do, not only in your college offense, but even in some NFL offenses with the level of detail and what's expected of you. And so it can absolutely take a little bit of time, and we've seen it. And I was blown away, Croc, when Emmanuel Sanders showed up in 2019, how immediately he was on the same page as Jimmy Garoppolo. Like the first series of the first game when Emmanuel Sanders showed up, Jimmy Garoppolo threw probably the most anticipatory pass I've seen from him in his 49ers career. It was like I think it was just an out route or something that he was running. Maybe he was on the his
slot to the top of the screen against the Arizona Cardinals. Yeah,
right. And he hadn't even begun his break. Jimmy Garoppolo already threw this out route and boom, boom, and he was there. And it was just like, he is a veteran player. He knows what the heck he's doing out there. And it was amazing to see that with Jimmy Garoppolo and Kyle Shanahan's offense versus some of the wide receivers they had at the time. And even though they had some talented guys and some younger guys, it was amazing to see that level of detail. And that's what Kyle wants you to have. And that's why I think, to answer that original question of this podcast, did the 49ers get better at wide receiver? I think they absolutely got better just by doing nothing, really.
Right. Just by some guys having a better season than they did last year based on maybe what we've seen from them, or just a natural progression of guys coming out of college at the wide receiver position.
Yeah. All of these guys, they're 2, 3, 4, or 5. They're all getting better at their craft in the NFL. So excited for that, especially if Deebo's got a little chip on his shoulder this year and has got a little extra steam behind him. I can't wait to see what that looks like with another year of Brandon Aiyuk as well. And Danny Gray taking that next step. Just a little more nuance to his game. All right. Next, Croc, let's look at some of these over-unders. Wide receiver receiving yards in 2023 next. Thanks once again, everybody, for making Locked On 49ers your first listen every day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you are subscribed up on YouTube, everywhere you get your podcasts, and make sure you're subscribed up as well to the Peacock and Williamson NFL show right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Myself and former NFL scout Matt Williamson breaking down the entire league daily. Paul says, just past midnight across the pond over here. What's up, Brian and Crocker? Oh, I love hearing that. And I'm glad we got a little earlier live stream in for you so you could get to bed a little bit sooner. You don't have to stay up until 3 a.m. to watch Peacock live. King Theo Productions says, if you're GM, who do you take as your 6th receiver on this roster?
Who's the best guy on special teams? And not even just as a returner, because I think when you think of receivers, you think of a return guy, but who can I utilize as a gunner? I saw someone talk about special teams earlier and how, maybe guys like Ray McLeod, maybe, who have more of a specialty as a kick returner, punt returner might go away, but there's still punt return. And I know kick return, they're making it more enticing to fair catch, and they've been doing that each year and changing certain rules, but punt return is going to be punt return regardless. So you still need somebody that's dynamic, but having a guy that tackles punt returns, right? A gunner at receiver who has a legit, value there. That's what you want. And that could be a guy like Ronnie Bell, right? Where he's just physical, aggressive, block, does what Kyle Shanahan asked him to do. Might only catch, 12 passes this year, but his presence on special teams is felt, and that's ultimately what you're looking for from that 6th guy who might work his way to an active roster, even though he's not going to see the field much as a receiver.
That's why it's tough, because you'll hear about, some guy making plays in camp, or you'll see, say, 2nd-year undrafted free agent Tay Martin. You'll see him in the preseason game make a catch. Like, all right. But if you're the 6th wide receiver and you're not playing special teams, you're not going to have a uniform anyway. So they might try to stash a player like that on the practice squad. Chris Connolly is a name to watch. Willie Snead, and that's if we're considering Aiyuk, Deebo, Juwan Jennings, Danny Gray, Ray McLeod as the top 5, and then everyone else is battling for number 6. Or maybe they just, maybe someone like Chris Connolly, who they signed as a free agent in the offseason. maybe he's just in case of injury, then he makes the squad and he's one of the top three guys. And then, or Willie Snead might be that guy. And then maybe if everyone's healthy, they only keep 5. Maybe they don't even keep a 6th wide receiver. They decide to go with a different position that's that's a little bit thinner. And the 49ers I like the depth here too, because you're talking about those top 5 and there's still, all these guys are worthy of being on an NFL roster. 7th round draft pick Ronnie Bell, last year's undrafted free agent rookie Tay Martin, who looked good in camp, and I think he's got an opportunity. He's a different style of player, can go up and get the ball in the air. Willie Snead has been around for a long time. Chris Conley's been around for a long time. Isaiah Winstead had a viral highlight tape before he was signed as an undrafted free agent. Daz Newsome, they signed to a futures contract as well. So nice group battling for that 6th wide receiver spot for the 49ers. There was the question about Ray McCloud too. And how valuable that return is. Croc, do you think the new kickoff rules almost make the kick returner like a punt returner? Because you still got to catch the ball if you're calling a fair catch. And so if kickers are trying to kick off shorter and higher to try to pin you inside the 5, you definitely don't want that doinking off of your chest, right? So not turning the ball over is pretty important. So make sure you catch the football. And so I think that'll be the biggest key there. And I wonder if it takes away the value of the long, big-legged kickoff guy too. And it's funny that happened right after the 49ers drafted a 3rd round kicker.
I want to circle back around to something that you said a little bit ago about the receiver position, how you talked about the depth. And it almost reminds me of 2014 receiver group, who on paper you feel like, oh man, like this got to be one of the best receiver groups in the league. They got different type of guys. You got dynamic, but there was something that didn't quite fit with the offense. And I feel like that's what these guys are. Like there's so much more I feel like you could get out of this group, but the offense on the 49ers is really predicated more on the run and then setting up the pass from the run, as opposed to guys just go out there, be athletes and win. And I remember when Chad Johnson played for the New England Patriots, and it was like, it's not Chad Johnson, the guy I know. And it's right, like they kind of just stripped him of his athleticism. And I'm not saying the 49ers strip guys, but I think there's a little bit more you get. But 2014, 49ers had Michael Crabtree, Anquan Bolden, Stevie Johnson, Brandon Lloyd, Bruce Ellington, Quentin Patton. Then there's other guys too. Kasim Osgood. I don't remember Jonathan Baldwin on that team, but I mean, I remember him being a 1st round pick that the 49ers ended up trading the other receiver, that dude that was terrible, AJ Jenkins, for Baldwin. But Kasim Osgood. So you kind of just, I don't know, just looking at those names, right? You think Crabtree, Bolden, Stevie Johnson, Brandon Lloyd, Bruce Ellington, like Quentin Patton. Like, man, this is a very interesting and intriguing group of guys, but there was something off a little bit with the offense and how it was ran. And then maybe, Cap not being the purest of passers at that time. And you just didn't get quite the production that you thought you would get. And that reminds me of this group where you look at just the pass catchers and it's like Brandon Aiyuk, Deebo Samuel. I really like what Ray McCloud is in this offense. Juwan Jennings, he serves his role. Then there's, of course, there's George Kittle, and then you have Christian McCaffrey. And I just feel like on paper it's like amazing, but I think statistically or from a production standpoint, it might end up being underwhelming, even though the offense will still be clicking because it's just not predicated on those guys putting up big numbers each week.
Yeah. And that's why I don't want people to sleep on Deebo Samuel. It's hard to sleep on Deebo Samuel, but everyone's ready to crown Brandon Aiyuk as the next guy. And the way Kyle Shanahan runs his offense, he wants to get guys open and let them run after the catch. And, we heard George Kittle's explanation last week about the, running the same play 4 or 5 times in a row. It was only averaging 2 yards carry, but he's trying to set up this other catch and run play. And I just don't think there's going to be enough opportunities for Brandon Aiyuk to go crazy at wide receiver with Deebo and Kittle and Christian McCaffrey around, because Kyle's going to try to find ways to get in the ball into the best yak receiver in the league's hands, and that's Deebo Samuel. Speaking of, real quick, we going over under on those wide receiver prop bets for receiving yards. I think we have Deebo and Aiyuk, right?
And we'll throw George Kittle in there. I mean, just because we're talking yardage, but so we'll start with George Kittle. 700.5. You going over or under?
I mean, I feel like this is, if he doesn't get hurt, it's a lock, right? So I'm gonna go over.
All right. Now, I would assume that the most confident at least me as well. Brandon Aiyuk, 775.5 yards, right? So 775. We're taking the over on that. Like, I feel like he's minimum 900 yards.
1,000-yard receiver last year, and he led the 49ers in receiving. He'll have enough opportunities to get 700 yards. What is it?
775.
775. So 800 yards. Yeah, lock it in. We're going
Lock
over.
it in.
I feel like we're going to go over on all of these.
Yeah, I'd say now Deebo's, and as much as I expect him to have a terrific year, I mean, if you told me he had 1,300 yards, wouldn't be surprised, right? Because if you light a fire under him, and all of a sudden he's the best version of Deebo that you see, I mean, that's 1,300. But he also, he's the riskiest one because of, just sometimes the injuries and things like that. Just being banged up a little bit, maybe a hamstring here and there or whatever it is. And it's like, man, he missed enough games. So his is set at 825.5. And that's probably the scariest. George Kittle 700, smash you over. Brandon Aiyuk 775, smash you over. Aiyuk doesn't really miss many games. But Deebo, that's the one where I feel like, man, he should get that. But it's also the scariest one. It's kind of the riskiest one because of the health aspect.
Yeah, like one of them's not going to get it, but I feel like you have to go over on all of them.
I think that these are low enough to where you could go over on all of these and it still not look like a great year by any of them, right? So if you just said, hey, George Kittle had 725 yards, Deebo had 845 yards, and Brandon Aiyuk had 790 yards, that don't sound like nothing crazy, but they all hit the over on their yards.
They could all miss like 2 or 3 games and still hit those numbers.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I mean. Last year, George Kittle went over on 700. He missed 2 games.
Yep.
He didn't play the first 2 games, I believe.
Stay healthy, 49ers. I mean, that's the way that this team gets derailed this year. And it seems like that's about the only way, unless the quarterback position somehow is a disaster. And there's still some questions on what exactly that's going to look like at quarterback. But, man, I feel pretty good about no matter who ends up at quarterback, they're going to be okay. And the 49ers are going to have a pretty darn good season this year. So stay healthy, Deebo. Stay healthy, Aiyuk. Stay healthy, Kittle. Stay healthy, all the running backs. And let's have some competent quarterback play. And, stay healthy, Nick Bosa.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for making Locked On 49ers your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Croc and I back tomorrow right here, Locked On 49ers.
Subscribe to this video.